Masking is an aspect of many design applications that can be intimidating or clumsy, and in Sketch, I'll be honest, at first I was a little bit confused by how masking worked, and they've honestly made masking work a lot more the way you'd expect it to in recent updates to Sketch, so I hope you all are running the latest version. If you're not, you may want to run your software updates. Otherwise, it's possible that what we're about to do might not work the way we're about to do it. So, if you guys remember that app outline document, go ahead and double-click it to open it up. That was the document where we designed the overall shapes that are going to build out the overall application that we're making. The other thing you'll find with your provided demo content is albumartwork.jpg. Now, we're going to be putting that album artwork inside of the circle that we created, the big circle in the middle of our interface. So, let's grab that album artwork and let's drag it into our Sketch document. And when we get that in our Sketch document, it's going to be too big. I'm going to scale it down. I'm just going to grab it, scale it down. We want it to be as wide as the circle, but we don't need it to be any wider than that. It just needs to be wide enough. And it doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, you can make it, to keep it simple, you can make it as wide as your overall user interface. It really doesn't matter. The shape is going to be cut down and popped into that circle. So let's take a look over at the layers list. We've got art circle and we've also got album artwork. We want to get both of these selected. Now previously we've been using the shift key to select multiple objects on our canvas or on our artboard. If we use the shift key over here, because it's a list, it's going to highlight multiple items on the list. So we don't want to use shift, we actually want to use command instead. And with both of those layers selected, we can go to layer on the menu bar at the top of the screen and we can choose mask with selected shape. Now that automatically creates a group, and within that group we now have our album artwork and we have our mask. It retitled our circle, mask, and it put a little bullet point next to our album artwork. And the reason for that bullet point is to show that it's affected by a mask. It's possible to have multiple things within a group, and not all of them are necessarily affected by the mask. So let's look at how that works. If I go and create a shape inside of this group, I'm going to create a rectangle. I'm going to tap R for rectangle, create a big rectangle that stretches out of the box. You can see that because it is in the group, it automatically gets the mask applied to it. It gets the bullet point next to it, and it's hidden where it goes outside of the circle. So what if this box is not meant to be cropped by the circle? What if I need to see the entire box? If I want it to stay in this group, but I don't want it affected by the mask, I want to make sure that my rectangle is selected. I want to go back to layer, and I have an option here that says ignore underlying mask. Now we can see the entire rectangle even though it's in the group that contains the mask. And with that, the bullet point has disappeared to show that this is no longer being affected by the mask. Just keep in mind that by default, anything else that I add to this group will be affected by the mask. This group is designed to allow me to mask other objects within that mask that's at the bottom of the group. Now I'm going to delete this rectangle and I'm going to talk about a different kind of mask that we're not actually going to use yet. We're going to use it a little bit later, but I want to talk about it while we're on the subject of masks. It's called an alpha mask. What we've just looked at, this mask that we have here with our album artwork inside it, that is called an outline mask. It's using the surface area of a shape to determine what should be masked and what should not. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to duplicate this group. I'm going to hold Option and drag this whole thing over to duplicate the group next to my artboard here. And you can see that the picture is solid because the circle is solid. Everything is solid, 100% opacity. The idea of an alpha mask is that we can use a gradient to have a fade out. We can have a graduated sort of fade out. So if you've got content that's going to be cut off but needs to be cut off gradually instead of being cut off at a hard edge, we can use these alpha masks. So what we want to do is we want to select the mask itself, we want to go back to layer, and then we have mask mode, which is currently set on outline mask. We can switch that from outline mask to alpha mask, and now it disappears. The reason for that is that a gradient determines how the mask behaves, not the shape itself. It'll be contained within that shape, but we don't have a gradient, so we don't have a mask. The gradients come from over here where it says fills on the inspector. So I'm going to turn my fill back on, but it's a color fill, so I'm having a problem. I need to click on the box that allows me to change the color, and at the top I can switch from a solid color to a gradient. And I'll choose my linear gradient here. Now, my picture came back. And the reason my picture came back is because my gradient is at 100% opacity at the top, and it's at 100% opacity at the bottom. If I want it to fade from top to bottom, then I can select the top or bottom point. In this case, I'm going to bring the bottom opacity down. And with that bottom point selected, I'm going to come down here. Underneath the bar showing my hue of color, we have a bar that shows our opacity. So by dragging that down, we can see that I am creating a gradient from the solid point at the top, which is at 100% opacity, down to the transparent point at the bottom, which is now at 0% opacity. Now, if you're not sure what the percentage is, or if you want to make it exactly 50%, down here we have RGBA. The A is alpha, and alpha is another word for transparency in digital graphics. So if I go and type in 50 for alpha, that's 50%. Now, the other thing to know is this is going from point A to point B, and point A is at the top and point B is at the bottom. If I just want the bottom to suddenly fade, I don't want it to fade gradually from the top down to the bottom, I can click on the gradient bar, give it a double click, and I can add a second point to the gradient. So I could say down here toward the bottom, I still want it to be 100%. And then down here at the very bottom point, that's where I want it to be 0%. And then I can do sort of a sudden fade out. I could do the same thing at the top as well. I could double click to add a second point, and on that second point, I can leave it at 100%, grab the very top point, and turn that down to 0%. And now I've got a fade on either end. And I can either manipulate the gradient points here on the gradient panel of the inspector, or I can grab them on the actual image. These little points are grabbable, they're selectable, and when you select one of the points, you can manipulate the color or the opacity on the inspector. I know we haven't really talked about gradients. We're going to get more into gradients when we start styling our interface, but when it comes to these alpha masks, while we're on the topic of masks, gradients are the name of the game. As we move forward, you'll become more comfortable with the gradient tool, and this tool will be a lot easier to use. And we're honestly only going to use this alpha mask in one particular place in our interface, and that's our track list. When we have a track list of songs, we're going to have the very bottom of the track list fade out to show that there's more content down below. If we cut it at a hard edge, it might look a little bit abrupt. It might honestly not imply that there's more content down below. That's the tough thing with user interface design. A lot of the times we design things in such a way that tell the user something. It's not just designed to look good. For example, if content seems to just end, we don't know if that's the end of the content or if we're allowed to scroll. So oftentimes we use these alpha masks to show that it's the end of what we can see, but not the end of the content.